Hello all. You are my first class to have online instruction. I've never done videos before. Not sure how this is going to work, but we're going to give it a shot. So, World War I, 1914 to 18. This is covered in your AP AMSCO reading in AP Unit 7, available on Google Classroom. So, as we move on, so your suggested reading is Unit 7. It goes from pages 451 to 539. I suggest you read this unit by, if you're A day, Tuesday, the 31st of March, or Wednesday, April 1st. You'll also have 8 ed puzzles to complete on World War I, the interwar years, and World War II. Tentative, and I'm still trying to figure out how to do it, will be your contemporary era, 1900 to the present, modified map and timeline test. I will get back to you on that. So here are the learning objectives for AP Unit 7. In this PowerPoint, we will be covering the causes and consequences of World War I, and explaining how governments used a variety of methods to conduct war. Here is the contemporary era. Map has a lot of interesting things, go all the way up from 1900 to the present. Here's the time grid for 1900 to the present. And let's start with the video.
World War I set the violent 20th century in motion. It was the first use of chemical weapons, the first mass bombardment of civilians from the sky, the century's first genocide. Never in history had so many taken up arms. Never had war reached so far from the battlefield. Everyone became a soldier, one way or another. This is the story of the men and women on 5 continents for whom the war was the defining moment of their lives. It colored everything that came before and shadowed everything that followed.
So need to know, World War I was the first total war. What you're looking at is a map of Europe in 1914. We're going to talk about the causes of World War I in the context. I use MENA. You'll find some AP teachers use the term main, but they mean the same thing. The causes for World War I. Militarism. This is an aggressive arms race that was allowed by the mass production of goods, the Industrial Revolution. Specifically in World War I, it's going to be the terror weapon of the age, the battleship, because you had to have control of the seas to win the war. There began to be an arms race between Germany and Britain on who could build the biggest and the most battleships. Cause number 2, imperialism. Western Europe is competing for new colonies, spheres of influence. Remember, they wanted access to raw materials and to expand their markets. Nationalism. Basing your identity in a nation state on similar culture and language. It's the beginning of I pledge allegiance to a specific nation. I'm willing to fight and die for them. In World War I, it's going to be trouble in the Balkan states, specifically Serbia, who want independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And then finally, the alliance system. Countries in Europe had formed alliances with each other, and we'll go over that. So, the Triple Alliance, or the Central Powers, were Germany, led by Kaiser Wilhelm II, Austria-Hungary, Franz Joseph. In the Ottoman Empire, the leader was Mehmed V. The major allies were Great Britain, King George V, France, Premier George Clemenceau, Russia, Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, and finally in 1917, the USA will enter the war, and their president is Woodrow Wilson. Note that Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, King George V of Great Britain, and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia were all cousins directly related to Queen Victoria. A video. Please excuse the language.
Your fatty friends Ferdinand didn't see Princeps pistol. Too busy guzzling his 10th Wiener Schnitzel. Pop the cap in his ass for my black hand brothers. Shave off that tash, it's bigger than your mother's. Now just like your bald head, you ain't got no air. I spit rhyme as your empire decline. Have you any notion of United Slav Nation? You catch my drift or do you want a translation? Serbia got friends, yo, Russia's our homie. Think we're scared? Here's 2 words for you. Blow me.
You want the war, Gav? We bring the pain, Slav. Blood spilled in Sarajevo, gonna cause a bloodbath, yo. Russians, Mongols, Turks, my bitches. Best watch out, cause my trigger finger itches. You're tiresome, you're irksome, like a Slavic Jeremy Clarkson.
Huh? Who the hell is that?
Nothing to do with us. Back to the story of doom. For poor tiny Serbia's about to go boom. You hear me, assassin? Our troops are massing. Get ready for the bombing, the shooting, the gassing. Here is the deal, yo. Shit just got real, yo. You'll be crushed under Austro-Hungary's heel, yo. I'll get you in the Balkans at the Great Belgrade. Even if those Russians are rushing to your aid.
You think so?
Oh, crap!
Franz Joseph, Serbia's our brethren. Same blood, same religion, same Slavic complexion. We're packing more army than you got salami. So stop your bragging, your trolling, or the Cossack pain train starts rolling. Last time you kicked off, I sweat revolution. This time my solution is your dissolution. Beware the Russian bear.
Everyone knows me, yeah. The Kaiser, yeah. Cooey. I'm Kaiser Wilhelm II, the first boss, I guess. But like the Godfather, the sequel kicks ass. Got clowns to the west of me and jokers to the east. But Austro-Hungary's my mate. Gotta eradicate the Serbian beast. So back off, Nick. Don't take the mick. And tell your mates France not to interfere. This ain't no prance, it's a German war dance.
Chill out, Cousin Willie. Stop acting so silly. You'll be tripping by flipping the bird willy-nilly. The armies of the Triple Entente, mighty. Russia, France, and this bitch, blighty. Your rhymes are the shambles, your words are the gamble. You're taking an enormous punt. No wonder my homies, and yours too, think you're a massive, difficult chap. Your territorial ambition puts us in this position, so go ahead, cuz, rant and rave. Your plans will be sunk like your floating junk. Royal Britannia rules the waves.
Empire braggarts, you hate the French and their snail-sucking, frog-cooking garlic stench. As for your dreadnoughts, wave them goodbye. I'll make your navy into gravy for sauerkraut pie. Gonna send my thoughts through Belgium into France. Nothing can stop this Teutonic advance. Germany will rise again like the past. A glorious empire built to last. Let me tell you, this ain't no mystery. Wilhelm the Great will go down in history!
Wilhelm the Great? More like Billy No Mates. Your ideas are absurd. We gave Belgium our word. We've got no choice if you won't behave. Our poor old grandma must be spinning in her grave.
Granny! Look into my eyes, you see compromise. Your collective demise will see our rise. I'll come back down now, I'll look at clown now. Ain't shit that can stop this countdown now. I'm going for a lie down now.
So, what actually sets off this global war? In the Balkan states, I've shown you a map. Franz Ferdinand, who is the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is assassinated by a Serbian national group called the Black Hand. Germany's going to back Austria. Here comes your alliance system into the process. Russia then has to back its allies, the Serbs. They're going to mobilize their army. What does mobilization mean? What that means is that you prepare for war. You bring all of your soldiers into the forward areas, you supply them, and you're ready to go at a moment's notice. Germany will take it as a threat, will declare war on Russia. In response, Russia's allies, France and Great Britain, will declare war on Germany, and the war begins.
In desperation, Nicholas and Wilhelm began a curious exchange of messages by telegraph.
July 28th, to the Kaiser. I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far. Nikki.
To the Tsar. With regard to the hearty and tender friendship which binds both of us from long ago with firm ties, I'm exerting my utmost to arrive at a satisfactory understanding with you. Your very sincere and devoted friend and cousin, Willie.
While the two cousins professed their friendship, their generals were preparing for war. On July 30th, Nicholas's staff told him Russia had to mobilize its army.
Think of what an awful responsibility you are advising me to take. Think of the thousands and thousands of men who will be sent to their deaths.
Nicholas held out until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Then he agreed to mobilize.
The hidden element in the war crisis of 1914 is the word honor. Honor is something you defend, sometimes irrationally, sometimes even when it isn't at issue. In fact, I would say in every case, it was in no great power's interest to go to war in 1914, and yet they all did it. One answer may be because their honor was at stake.
The Russian mobilization was just what the German general staff wanted. Now Germany could mobilize under the pretense that it was only responding to a threat. France soon followed. News of the war hit the capitals of Europe like a thunderbolt, sending thousands of people surging into the streets. In Berlin, the artist Ludwig Meidner was among them.
And out of the depths of the earth rose dreadful fiends that settled in everyone's brains. And in their madness, they turned their scourge into a joyous festival.
The citizens of each nation were convinced they were fighting a just and defensive war. Conflicts that had wanted them were set aside. The great socialist movement, which was supposed to know no national borders, proved no match for the call to arms. The same was true of the suffragettes. Most decided they would support their men and worry about their rights later. But for the continent's monarchs, the celebration would be short-lived. For what their opponents at home had been unable to accomplish, the war would. In the next 4 years, the monarchies of Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary would all fall. But the most profound changes brought about by the First World War would be those affecting millions of ordinary people. People like Vera Brittain, who proclaimed the declaration of war to be one of the most thrilling days of her life, not knowing that nearly every close male friend she would soon be dead. Henri Designeau, a French attorney who fought and survived the deadliest battle of the war. Princess Evelyn Blücher, English by birth, German by marriage. She was forced to choose between her country and her husband. Mustafa Kemal, a Turkish colonel whose snap judgment to stand and fight cost Britain a disastrous defeat. Maria Botkareva, a Russian woman who not only fought in the front lines, but found herself at the center of mass revolt. Siegfried Sassoon, a member of the British landed gentry, who went from hunting foxes in the countryside to Germans in no man's land. Richard Stumpf, a German seaman who started the war a loyal patriot and ended it a revolutionary. Carolyn Webb, a young British woman who was willing to die for her country, not in the front lines, but in a shell factory. Woodrow Wilson, United States President, who in the peace that followed became as much a casualty of the war as any soldier who fell on the battlefield. Katie Kollwitz, a German artist and mother who lost a son to World War I and a grandson to World War II. The Great War was a great tragedy, for it was not an end, but a beginning, ushering in history's most violent century.
Acted goofy.
Its dark shadow has not disappeared, even in our own time.
So what you're looking at right now is a postcard. It was printed in Great Britain, showing all the Allies. I can date this postcard just by looking at it. Who's missing? Which ally is missing? The United States. I know that this, by looking at this postcard, this was printed before April 1917. The U.S. will not enter the war for 2.5 years. So this is the German Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan objective is that you're going to fight a war on 2 fronts. Your objective is just keep Russia from advancing and take Paris. After you take Paris, you'd go after Russia. The Schlieffen Plan is going to fail. At the Battle of Marne, Allies are going to hold German troops in eastern France, and you get a stalemate. A stalemate is like in chess, where neither person can make a move. What do? You dig in, and you get the beginning of a new weapon technology, way of waging war, trench warfare. At the Battle of Verdun in 1916, over 700,000 lives were lost. This is what's important and what makes World War I stand out as global war. It becomes a war of attrition. It's not about taking territory anymore because you're bogged down in the trenches. It becomes a war of attrition. And what that means is your objective now is to make the other side give up by creating mountains of corpses. So it's really hard to see how people did not know about this new technology. So this is old world meeting the new world. Here's a German cavalryman, one on horse. He's wearing a gas mask, which is modern technology, but he's also carrying a long spear. This is from two different ages of war. So one thing we're going to do right now is I'm going to go to this website, and it's a quiz. Hopefully it's going to load. There we go. And this is from National Public Radio. And what it is what came out of World War I. And there's the picture of the German cavalryman on his horse with his rifle and his gas mask. Let's see what happened. So let's start with this one. Which controversial military utility was first developed during the war? Was it pilotless drones? Agent Orange, which was something to clear out jungle that also injured soldiers. Napalm, or automatic weapons. Which one do you think was first developed during World War I? It's actually pilotless drones. Hewlett's-Berry automatic aircraft was an unmanned aerial torpedo developed by the Navy. It was not very good, but it was the first time that happened. Look at 2. Which item of clothing was popularized by World War I soldiers? Was it the bowler hat, the trench coat, the flannel shirt, or ski mask? Balaclava is the name for it. You should know this one real easy because you still see them and people still buy them. All right, the trench coat replaced heavy serge, heavy wool coats that were worn by the British and French soldiers. And Burberry, who still sells trench coats, and another company claimed to have invented it. Germany tried a new concept called Sommerzeit. What is it? Is it daylight savings time? Summer vacation for children? The rationing of alcohol? Or military conscription or the draft? What do you think it is? Were you right? Sommerzeit, summertime. This is daylight savings time. Germany and Austria-Hungary were the first to adopt the practice of shifting their clocks to conserve coal during the war. Other countries like the U.S. and Great Britain followed, but many went back to standard time after the war. We're in standard time right now in March. It was implemented again, brought out again in World War II. We still have it today. What French word came into standard English during the war? Mêlée, impasse, accoutrement, or camouflage? I think you know this one like you know the trench coat. It was camouflage. All right, camouflage. This is one of the very first appearances of camouflage, the word in English on this photograph. And it's meant to conceal you from enemy view. Which item for women found its start on the battlefield? Nylons, menstrual pads, curling irons, or nail polish? What do you think? It's actually menstrual pads. All right, hygiene. Battlefield nurses repurposed cellulose bandages. Kotex introduced the commercial version in the 1920s. Finally, which advance in naval warfare was invented during World War I? Was it the submarine, the armored ship, the aircraft carrier, or the torpedo? The submarine, armored ship, and torpedo already existed. It was the aircraft carrier that was new. The Furious was built as a battle cruiser and later converted into an aircraft carrier by the Royal Navy. Edwin Dunning became the first person to land an aircraft on a moving ship when he did so on the HMS Furious in 1917. Aircraft carriers will come into their own, be the horror weapon of the first part of World War II, and help us win the Pacific War in World War II. So that's kind of interesting that you have that. So I'm going to go back down to that. So, new military technology led to increased levels of wartime casualties, machine gun, long-range artillery, submarines, battleships, poison gas, which we'll be looking at, tanks, grenades, the old pineapple used by the U.S., and what's known as a potato masher used by the Germans because it looked like a potato masher, airplanes, and zeppelins. Now, what does this do to change warfare? Horrific. Because now for the first time you have long distance death. You rarely see the face of your enemy. Easier to kill. Here are some photographs for trench warfare. You know, what kind of living conditions do you think these guys would be under? If you look in the top left-hand picture, you see all the water there. One of the big things, if you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan tells Forrest as soon as he gets to Vietnam, make sure you keep your feet dry. Otherwise, you'll get a bacterial infection that was known as trench foot. This is a cross-section of one side of trench alignment system. So what you have here are the trenches. This area here is known as no man's land. You would have this setup over here facing. So if you go over the top, you come out of your trench. That's where we get the term over the top. If you manage to survive across no man's land and get into this trench, take this trench, the people in this trench would fall back to this trench. They would fight. This then becomes no man's land, and perhaps they would retake the first trench. This happened all through the war. This is an aerial photograph of opposing trenches in no man's land in Artois, France. This was taken by an airplane, of course. Aerial reconnaissance was something that was new, taking aerial photographs of the battlefield. German trenches are on the right and at the bottom. British trenches are in the top left. The vertical line that you see right here, that was an old pre-war road. The trenches were zigzagged. They weren't straight. If a shell hit in a trench that was straight line, it could kill a lot of people. By having it zigzag, you could have just a few people standing there. If you took a hit, you had some protection. This is the Verdun battlefield today. That is not natural. There are still shells buried in eastern France where the trench lines were to this day. This is called trench art, and I normally pass this around in class. I've had one sitting on my shelf just under the TV all year. These are spent shells that would be picked up by the soldiers, and they would use a punch to decorate them and send them home as souvenirs. Often the French ones would have chateaus. I have a French one. You can tell that it's got a French like a royal palace, and they've got pointed roofs. The British ones had a tendency to have Windsor Castle or the Union Jack. American ones, which are rare, because for one, they didn't come into the war until 1917, often had an eagle or the U.S. flag on it. This would be a howitzer that would fire that shell. This is a howitzer from World War II, but they were used World War I.
German army introduced a new weapon in hopes of breaking the stalemate on the Western Front. Poison gas.
First came chlorine, the yellow gas, then came the green gas, then came mustard gas, the granddaddy of napalm. And each of these had appalling effects on men who were trapped in the trench system. It didn't break the defensive lines. It made the level of suffering much worse than it had been before.
The British soldier and poet Wilfred Owen witnessed one man's death from gas poisoning. In one of his most famous poems, he captured another dimension of total war.
Gas. Gas! Quick, boys. An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmet just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.
So, Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen is one of my favorite poems. Hopefully we'll be able to do an activity with it via Google Classroom. As I said, I'm just trying this out. The artist Otto Dix was a German soldier in World War I. This is actually a portrait of a friend of his who had died 7 months earlier in the trenches and had been buried in the side of the trench. After a heavy rainstorm, part of the trench wall washed away and his friend's body was exposed. This is a portrait. This is Total War.
As men marched off to war, women marched off to work. The result was a dramatic but temporary change in the workforce of every fighting nation. But of all the professions women entered, none was more important than shell making. In Britain, 1 million women poured into munitions factories. 28,000 women worked here. on Warren Lane in southeast London. The Woolwich Royal Arsenal was Britain's largest. This, too, was a battleground.
The first time you go around, you think, what an interesting place. Then the evil smell becomes more noticeable. The particles of acid land on your face and make you nearly mad, feeling like pins and needles.
Gabriel West knew the dangers of working in a shell factory. She first ran a factory canteen, and then shocked her father by joining the newly formed Women's Police Service. Her assignment was to maintain order inside factories.
The fumes often mean 16 or 18 casualties a night. You're blind and speechless by the time you escape.
War work was dangerous, laborious, heavy, dirty. Women were, blown up in powder factories, in accidents with TNT, and there were several hundred deaths in both France and Britain, just due to explosions alone.
An exploding shell was a quick way to die. But there was a slower way. TNT poisoning. The first signs were like a common cold. Nasal stuffiness, headaches, and coughs. But continued exposure caused symptoms far from ordinary, as a young worker named Caroline Webb was to discover.
It was all bright ginger, all our front hair. And all our faces were bright yellow. They used to call us canaries. This doctor, he was looking at us girls one day and he'd say, half you girls will never have babies, and the other half are too sick. God help you.
Seeking adventure, Caroline Webb had left her job as a dressmaker for employment first as a shell filler, then bullet maker. We were kids, she later said. We didn't bother whether we were blown to bits or not.
Sometimes when we come upon our little train, it will be all packed with different people. And there'd be all the officers sitting there. Some of them used to look at us as if we were insects. And others used to mutter, well, they're doing their bit. We said, well, we don't mind dying for our country.
Just young kids.
One of the things that women gained as a result of going into the war factories, aside from decent wages, was recognition, a sense that what they did mattered, and that it mattered centrally to the most important thing that was going on at that time, which was winning this war.
Winning the war required mountains of shells and bullets made by women. Some hoped that the new openings created by the war would continue afterwards. But when the war ended, so did most opportunities for the girls with yellow hands.
Okay, so we have finished today's video. First, let me apologize. This is the first time I've done anything like this. It's taken me 3 hours to get it set up this far. I'm hoping I get a little better as I go on. Let me encourage you that you go on to Google Classroom and do Ed Puzzles 1, 2, and 3, all right, on the world, changing 7.1, 7.2, the causes of World War I, 7.3, conducting the war, and then unresolved tensions of World War I. So the first 4 videos, they'll be uploaded and available to Google Classroom. As I find out more, I am doing this video before it has been officially called distance learning, but I need to do a test on it. I'll be talking to you, and if you have any questions, just text me or send me an email. I'm here. See you next time.